Absolutely.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're really honored and grateful to have you all with us. And I really have to thank and congratulate you. The last program in this series, the previous program in this series, we had in a community with a population literally 100 times the size of Thomson. I won't say which one, but about 100 times the size of Thomson. And we had, I believe, 7 people turn up for it. So it's really gratifying to see. I don't know exactly how many you are, maybe 25 or 30 turn up here in Thomson for this program. So we surely appreciate that. We're also really grateful to Deanne Kramer and everyone here at York Township Public Library for hosting us. My name's Matt Meacham. I'm a program manager with Illinois Humanities. I'm based in our southwestern office in Edwardsville. We're a nonprofit organization that serves as the Illinois affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. On the back of your program is a description of who we are and what we do. And if any of that interests you, please talk with me or one of the other Illinois Humanities staff members who are here. Paul Dorica, our Director of Programs, who's downstairs greeting folks, and Elliot Heilman, our Program Manager for Public Policy, who has been enormously helpful, and I thank both Elliot and Paul for all of their help. This event is part of a series called The Country and the City, Common Ground in the Prairie State. The series consists of text-based panel discussions with audience participation about issues that affect both urban and rural Illinois communities. The complex, sometimes tense relationship between Illinois' major cities and its rural areas has been a significant theme throughout its history, from long before it became a state 2 centuries ago up to the present. One of the goals of this series is to foster communication between rural and urban Illinoisans. On your way in, I think tucked into your program, you received a piece of paper containing a couple of questions, and we invite you to write your answers to those and return them to us after the discussion. I don't know if everybody got those. I think we made 20 copies, and turned out we had better attendance than we anticipated. So you may or may not have one, but if you do and you'd like to write a little something, we'd love to have those, and we'd like to share them with other participants in this series, and possibly on our website or social media if you're comfortable with that. If you're not, that's perfectly okay. Just make a note of that. The subject of this evening's discussion, as you know, is the social and economic impact of incarceration on both urban and rural communities. And we're honored to have 3 thoughtful panelists. Hopefully we'll be joined by a 4th to help us address this topic. Their biographical information appears in your program. Let me acknowledge, though, that for various reasons, unfortunately, we don't have anyone representing the federal prison here in Thomson or any other federal prison on the panel, and I apologize for that. Charlene Bielema, the editor of the Clinton Herald, had agreed to join us on the panel to discuss the evolution of the prison here in Thomson, and was really looking forward to doing that, but had an unexpected and unavoidable work commitment, and we weren't able to find anyone to replace her. So I'm really sorry about that. I imagine you all probably know a great deal about the history of the prison so far, here in Thomson, and so you all, by all means, should feel free to jump into the conversation and and share your knowledge of the prison here in Thomson and any other subject matter that's on your mind. We welcome you to participate. All opinions are welcome, including opinions that might differ from those of the panelists. We just encourage you to treat others as you would wish to be treated. It's a privilege to introduce the moderator of this discussion, Kelly Covey, principal of the Covey Group in Chicago. Kelly's widely respected for her skill in leading discussions of complex subjects. She's knowledgeable about social issues affecting cities, but is familiar with rural culture also, and she's both deeply insightful and deeply caring. Please welcome Kelly Covey.
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to set up like this for a second as I introduce myself so I can see everybody. I just wanted to say it's such a pleasure to be here. I've been doing this with Matt and Paul in Illinois Humanities since back in September. So we've been going down to different communities over the course of the year, talking about different subjects. And I think for me, I grew up in a small town in Texas. My family's all still there. And then I moved from there to Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Then I lived in Buffalo, New York. Then I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've been in Chicago for the last 16 years. So the idea that we would bring people from different kinds of communities together to have conversations was always exciting to me and something I thought was possible. And I think a couple things I just wanted to say that I've learned over this period, which is one, I think there was a lot of idea that there's like an urban perspective and then there's this rural perspective, and we're all so drastically different in how we see things. And I think one of the things I've really learned is that a lot of those distinctions just collapse once we start to talk to one another, that they're not really as hard and fast lines as maybe people thought. And then the other one is just a real willingness, despite I know what we hear in the media about how polarized we all are, and it's a tense political environment. But what I have found is that people have real willingness to talk to one another and want to talk to one another and want to find some common ground. So I'm looking forward to this conversation tonight. I just want to say, too, just a few things about just some guidelines for the discussion. My hopes are really pretty simple, but I would ask just that people are respectful toward one another. I really hope the audience will participate and share. Respectful to me just means you're willing to hear a perspective that you don't agree with. So just a willingness to listen even if you don't agree. And secondly, just to be aware of how much space you're taking up. I want to try to get in certainly the panelists, but also as many audience members as we can as well. So just, if you hear yourself going into the 10th minute of a comment, maybe dial it back a little bit, okay? And so otherwise, we're gonna get started, and I'm gonna sit down. I know it's gonna be a little bit hard to hear us or see us, but hopefully this will work out. The first thing I wanna do is just have the panelists introduce themselves, and what I'm gonna ask you to do is just say your name, where you're from, and a little bit about the work you do, and then one question you think we should be asking about prisons and incarceration. Okay. And we are going to use the mics just so that everybody can hear.
Great. I'm a big fan of mics, not. My name is Carolyn Gursky. Currently, I work for the Illinois Department of Corrections. I actually retired in December, and I'm on contract for 12 more days, and then I'll start a new adventure. I'm retiring from them as the chief of the women's division. I've spent 30 years working for the Illinois Department of Corrections. I started as a correctional officer and worked my way up through all the ranks to where I'm at now. I live currently in Rushville, Illinois, which is a rural community, and I also grew up about 30 miles away from there, which is another rural community. So this is like home to me. So.
And question.
Oh, my question. I think asking maybe what your role is or what part you can play at helping with the prison being here in town. So.
My name is Eddie Comiet. I am a regional director with AFSCME Council 31. We are the state workers union. You may have heard a little something about that over time, and we used to represent the workers when they were state workers here in Thomson. So got some through lines there from that. I come to the union from really a long trade union history, but no background in corrections. That came as a result of my job with AFSCME. Before I was here, I worked for the United Food and Commercial Workers, so I was a cracker stacker, loud and proud. And then I went to work for SEIU, Local 1 in Missouri, and I was their organizing director in low-wage work pretty much all across that state. I'm a country kid myself, born and raised in Millstadt, Illinois, which is population 1,700 when I lived there. It's 10,000 now, which is insane. But when I lived there, it was 1,700. You know, I've been with AFSCME about 10 years, and part of my function as a regional director with that organization is I am the liaison between the union and management for corrections, for youth corrections, Department of Juvenile Justice, and for the Department of Parole. So yeah, that's my background. So I have 9.5 minutes, right? No, I'm kidding. My question would be, you know, and I think this comes up a lot in sort of the intersections of all this work that we do together, is how can we as a society build a more responsive and small d democratic public safety system, which includes incarceration, right? So how do we kind of change the conversation to think of it as a continuum as opposed to this prison over here? Because I think that's where a lot of our research and a lot of our experiences in dealing in this population suggest that we need to go. So that would be my question.
Good evening, everyone. I'm George Wilson. I'm a youth mentor from the Better Boys Family Services, which is in the city, Chicago, West Side. And what I do there is I redirect young teenagers, 13 to 18, to try to curb their behavior. Of course, as you guys know, a bunch of the news, quote-unquote, individuals that you see in the city shooting guns and stuff, I try to get out there and wherever the incident occurred, go out there and try to talk to them. I done combated a couple of the shooters and redirect them from shooting one another and other individuals. My connection with these guys, I'm a former inmate of the Department of Corrections. I haven't been there in over 7 years. 7 years ago, I decided I didn't want to live there anymore. So got tired of looking at these guys. But I'm grateful that I changed my life for the better. And it was a primary purpose and a personal goal to myself at my last stint in prison is to get out there, get back to the city, and redirect many as kids as possible that'll listen to me to keep them from going through what I went through in and out of prison. So that's what I do. And my question is what type of program or suggestions that we can come up and give to these guys to help make the turnaround so less as possible to keep them coming in and out. So,
Wonderful. Thank you so much, George. Okay, so before we kind of talk more to the panelists, I'm going to start off by trying to engage us all in a little bit of discussion, which maybe some of you may love and some of you might find enormously awkward, because I'm going to ask you to talk to the people around you a little bit, and I'm going to ask the panelists to talk to one another. But here's the thing I'm going to ask us to talk about. So we just put up a set of statistics, and I'll read them off. But what I'm going to ask you to get into groups of 3 or 4 people, just whoever's around you, and talk about what of these you were aware of, what you're not aware of, and maybe what felt surprising. So what you're aware of, what you're not aware of, and what felt surprising. So the first one is the total cost of Illinois state prisons in 2010 was $1.7 billion. The total cost per inmate in Illinois state prisons in 2010 was $38,268 per inmate. 5.7, the United States has 5.7 of the world's population, but 25% of the prisoners. The private prison industry as a whole took in over $5 billion in revenue in 2011. And then a couple more over here. Between 80 and 90% of women and gender non-conforming people who are in prisons and jails have been survivors and victims of domestic and sexual violence before they entered the prison or jail. So between 80 to 90% of women and gender non-conforming people. Young people who are suspended from school are 3 times more likely to drop out than young people who are not. So if you're suspended, much more likely to drop out. And 50% of people in prisons in Illinois dropped out of high school. So again, so a little bit about the cost of prisons. So $1.7 billion in Illinois, $38,268 per inmate in Illinois. And I'm just going to, so that everybody can kind of hear this because they may not be able to see it. Again, 5% the U.S. has of the world's total population, but 25% of prisoners. Private prison industry made, so if we're thinking about this number of 1.7 billion, the private prison industry made 5 billion in a year. And then again, just a reminder over here that 80 to 90% of women and gender nonconforming people have been victims of sexual assault before they entered. And then the last one, that young people who are suspended, more likely to drop out, and that 50% of people in prison in in Illinois are high school dropouts. So again, just what you were aware of, what you're not, and what's surprising. Okay? And we'll just talk for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Okay? So if you could just try to pull some people together around you and chat, that would be great.
We got a question. Yes. Okay, so I actually work right at the prison. Is that like on prisons they make something or familiar with the layout? I think it's Illinois that they might want.
Yeah, no, it's really the private prisons here, like UK, private government.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Good question.
All right. I'm wondering how many, just in the state of Illinois alone, how many of those inmates are non-violent offenders? How many are out of other than incarceration? 48,000 persons. I just feel like that's insane.
We'll get you, but if I don't know, we'll get you out. We had to laugh, and then wasn't my experience, but I would take it. Big money. Never, ever, any medicine tried to get you to argue their skills for them. And I had some research back in repairs. And oh man, I got moved down to I worked in the incarceration and they had 2% better to work pay than responsible. I couldn't live without it. I'm out of boy, she deserved that. I got to take care of her. I have happy memories with the most cat. I was there. Started out here in 08, and closed in 10. And then I finished up in 15. So,
All right, everybody. I hate to interrupt. I hate to interrupt, but I'm going to ask everybody to come back. So thank you all. Thank you all for jumping in and engaging. Really appreciate that. It sounded like you were having good conversations. I'd love to just hear a few thoughts before we get started, if anybody wants to share. Panelists can, or as well as audience. Anything you wanted to talk about what you were aware of or not aware of, or anything surprising that you might want to share. Yes?
I was so shocked that 80 to 90% of the women who were incarcerated had been sexually abused. I would never have guessed that it was that high.
Great, thank you.
And in relation to that, I think if there had been more mental health or more help to these people, and that they wouldn't have resorted to crime, you know?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thoughts over here?
I think we spent a lot of time, for the three of us, none of those statistics or numbers surprised us because it's all a field that we've worked in. We kind of spent time talking about the resources and where the money's spent, and whether the money, you know, and we also talked about that even though 38,000 is a big number, Eddie talked about some places that's much higher. We figured out to be like $100 a day per offender. If you think about, most of us probably, you know, spend that much on ourselves given a week's time or whatever, but if you have a place like what you were calling it?
We were talking about the youth prisons that
Right.
they're talking about, the tent cities that they put up on the borders. The dollar figure they're talking about there is $775 a day, and I think it's just a real sort of, it's a stark contrast between the private sector prisons at $775 a day and a public sector, you know, taxpayer-driven government prison at $100 a day.
Correct.
It's a really stark difference.
Where we know where the money's being spent because we're itemizing it for that $100, and then where's 770? What are they getting different in a tent type setting than, you know, a brick and mortar setting? So.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to get into this a little more in a second.
One more thing, our brother
Yes.
was talking about $100
Why?
does not. $100 doesn't buy very good food, very good clothing, or very good anything when you're incarcerated, right? So the question was, even at $100 a day, where is that money going? You know, how does it get to the inmate in some way that's a resource-driven thing?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
I was talking, and I worked at the Thomson prison. I was talking to Lacey here. I worked at the Thomson prison for a couple years, and when it closed, I retired from Dixon prison. And I didn't know statistics, but a vague idea about the money, and I know about the medicine. I'm a nurse, and the cost for the medicine is phenomenal. unbelievably. But really, I'm taken by, George, if I may, what prompted you in the prison setting, because I never really didn't seem to see it, what prompted you to get out of that cycle and change your life, and sounds like change some children's life? Because I think that's pretty impressive. I don't hear that. I didn't hear that so much. And I find it very intriguing. How come we can't do more of that to reduce that recidivism? And, you know, some people go out and break a rule so they can come back in. They've got a hot and a cot, and they can survive in there. They can't survive out there. So, George, I'm very impressed and, you know, wonder if that'd be part of a discussion. What can we do better to help more people do what you've done?
So do you mind if we just bookmark that question and come back to it? Because we're going to talk about that, and I want George to be able to share that.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Okay.
Yes? No?
Thank you so much. Okay, so, yes, sir.
We just noticed so much that the culture has changed from when we grew up to when kids are growing up now. There's so much more to get involved with. There's more computers, more technology, more everything. The schools have changed. Everything has changed so much when we grew up, so it's a whole different ballgame now than it was like when we grew up. And it was just right. It's a lot more difficult. Dollar-wise, things have changed so much. So it's just another thing to add into the mix.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the way I wanted to get started, oh, we have one more back there? Great.
Yes. I'm a volunteer at the Thomson prison. We have a prison ministry also growing up in Clinton. I think maybe this has nothing to do with whatever you guys are discussing, but one way to help these inmates is through faith. And we have some faith-based programs that we bring into the prison to help these inmates that are in prison and the ones that are ready to come back into society, in order to help them to reintegrate into society, into their church, into their community. So maybe more faith-based programs will be good to help the ones that are in and the ones that are ready to come back into society.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that, as sort of what is needed. If we think incarceration is not the answer or not the whole answer, then what other things are needed. So thank you for that. I want to just start, since we're going to be probably talking a lot about the costs and some of the negative effects, I wanted to start off by just asking this question of, like, what is the benefit? What is the purported claims or benefits of prisons? Like, what do we imagine they're here for? What are they supposed to do? And I mean, I'll go to the panelists first, but if anybody else wants to sort of say what they think, that'd be great. And just remind you guys to use the mic if you can, please.
They're going to make me go first.
Yeah.
I sat in the wrong seat. I think what the purported claim is, which has been that for a long time, is that it's removing people from society. It's providing public safety. It's supposed to be providing rehabilitation and incarcerating people, controlling that part of the population that is deemed to be criminally deviant. So I think those are some of like just the key buzzwords. I mean, I'm sure we'll discuss those at length, but.
Right. I would agree that I think that's the general rationale. I think that, you know, we as society decide on a fairly regular calendar what's illegal, what isn't illegal, and if somebody breaks the law, there are debts to be paid to that society. You know, and I think that the prisons have historically been, you know, a part of that sort of this is what you have to do component. I think over time that has changed. I think with, and to the sister's point about the dearth of mental health treatment, you know, as we closed statewide mental health institutions, we opened more and more prisons because that there's some segment of the population that has some specific needs that are not met currently by our structure, and so that's how we fill those gaps. And it changes, and what we call it and what we do in those facilities changes over time, but there's some segment of the population that needs service from the rest of us, and this is how we deliver it, as you know, as problematic as that may be. I think that's part of the component as well.
Benefits. I really don't see any benefits in it coming from the perspective of an inmate. most of incarcerated individuals today that's incarcerated, it's like a meeting place, just like the town hall meeting here, meeting place, and you really, by it's being so many programs taken up out of the prison system now, we just get there and we gather when they allow us to gather with one another, and we learn how to become better criminals, quote unquote, right? I mean, that's like the norm conversation. There's nothing in there structured enough to say, hey, man, I know I took your car, and man, I'm sorry, man, but next time I'll buy me a bus card. You know, it's I took your car. If you didn't have that freaking alarm on it, I wouldn't have got caught. So I'm gonna find a way to get around your alarm and take your car again. So I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what is the benefits of taking you away, other than taking you away from your family and your loved ones.
Yeah. So I'm hearing public safety. What do we do when people commit crimes? This is sort of one of the things. This is like the recourse of paying a debt to society. And then I just want to name too, like what Eddie, you just said, that it sounds like in many ways too like a catch-all for all of the people who might need services to support in some way that we don't have a structure for.
The GED programs, vocational ed programs,
Right.
we try to deliver these types of skill building programs within a correctional environment to try to fill those gaps. Right?
Right. Well, high school dropouts.
Exactly.
Right, okay. So let me just start then, because I know we're going to be talking about sort of the human cost too, so I want to pick up on the economic piece of it. Is this Tanya?
Yeah, Tanya.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Tanya. Come on in. Have a seat. I'm Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
Nice to meet you too. Have a seat.
Hi, Eddie. Hi, George. Hi, everyone.
So, Tanya, I hate to put you on the spot, but because I'm about to ask Carolyn a question, but I just want to give you just a second if you could just introduce yourself to the crowd, your name, where you're from, and a little bit about the work you do right now.
My name is Tanya. I am an ARI graduate out of Will County. I've been in recovery for 5 years. Let's see. I go to school at Moraine Valley. I'm an undergrad for addiction studies and policy. And most of what I do is I'm in like a task force in Chicago where we go and we speak on prison diversion programming and gender-specific rules for inmates. So I'm kind of a radical.
Wonderful. Can't wait. All right.
You're in good company.
All right.
So, Tanya, we're going to take up this question then. So, Carolyn, when you and I first talked on the phone, one of the things that you said to me was 80% of the people who are incarcerated shouldn't be there. But then you also made this comment about, even though it seems like that prisons are providing jobs or some job security, that it really is a cost to taxpayers. And I got from you sort of like an unnecessary cost to taxpayers. So I was just wondering if we could just take up the economic question for a minute and just tell your thoughts on that piece.
Sure. I think long range you have to look at, there's probably going to be a cost to the taxpayer no matter what. It may not be as much if we spend the money in prisons, but what we're doing essentially we have 29 facilities in Illinois right now. So essentially what we're doing is warehousing people. Yes, we are on better steps to rehabilitate people, and we're providing that mental health treatment, and we're trying to change culture and trying to change the trajectory of people who come into our system. However, while we're spending that money on that, we're taking money away from all the social programs and the economic programs in the communities, which is some of the reason why the people are coming to us, is because George talked about this earlier, is that substance abuse treatment. It's so few and far between, it's so expensive, it's not available to everybody, but that's a big precursor to coming to prison. And we talked about it being almost like a gateway. Almost, probably 75 to 80% of the people have had some drug addiction, alcohol addiction, or some dealing that they were involved to do with something with alcohol or drugs that brought them to prison. They may be there for some other reason, but that's obviously a common denominator. And so if we can't provide that service on the outside, obviously they're coming on the inside to us, and we aren't really economically set to where we can get everybody in substance abuse. And I'm sure George can attest to that not everybody gets into substance abuse that needs to, and sometimes it's shortened, or their stay with us isn't long enough, and so they don't qualify. The other thing is mental health. I'm sure all of you remember that we went through a period where we closed all the mental health facilities, as Eddie alluded to, and those people came to us. Now we really incarcerate the largest mental health population. We're actually mental health facilities more than we are prisons. So I think we've made choices that weren't the best choices at the time, but that was the trend of the whole United States, was to incarcerate and warehouse people and take them out of society because we'd all be safer for it. And I don't think anybody today feels any safer than they did then, because those people are all still coming out, and the longer we incarcerate them, the statistics show the longer sentences that we give them, the worse that we make those people. And so I think economically we have to look at, is putting everybody in prison the best choice, and how can we reallocate those resources and that the money that we're spending on prisons into the community. So, and I know that opens up a larger pool of questions about what about the people who work in the prisons and who rely on that for income, and we can talk about that as we go along, and Eddie will have a lot to say about that.
So can we take that question up?
Yeah, absolutely. My sister, I think, is a great example, right, of a prison closed. You had to find employment in another place, another part of the system in Dixon. Very disruptive to people's lives when we end up sort of changing the course of what we're currently doing in any institutional setting. So I think as we have this conversation, and the union will tell you, my union, AFSCME, will tell you that this conversation is critically important. We are engaged with the department in moving the culture in areas and ways that it needs to be moved. And while we do that, we need to not lose sight of the fact that the folks that work in these prisons have simply always been following the direction that they've been given, and doing the best they can with the resources that they have to deliver these programs and services. And they are an integral part of whatever the transition looks like. We've got, I think, 11,000, 13,000 inmates that are considered SMI, seriously mentally ill, in a system that's a quarter of the population that's incarcerated. And those folks need services. They need some kind of institutional setting. They need some kind of sort of foundational place that they can rely on. And those places need resources and they need staff, right? So we've got a lot of folks who've built a lot of skills in this area, some of which they wouldn't like to use. Believe it or not, COs don't want to be always about security. They want to be about talking to inmates, trying to help, trying to move things in a positive direction for those folks. And that's a human resource that we have available to us in the system as it exists that should never be lost, because we're going to have to replicate it no matter what we do. So we may as well allow those folks, right, and rural communities rely on these institutions. Some of the best jobs in deep southern Illinois are state prison jobs. There's just nothing else around, first of all. And, it's something that over time has developed into a decent career for folks. We have to keep that in our mind too. We don't want to, in addressing the prison problem, we don't want to damage our employment picture in those areas either. So it's a real, I think it's a complicated issue, but it's one that there are some definite, clear sort of best practices. Well, just one place I'll mention, I'm feeling myself getting into the 10th minute, so I'll stop, but we've got some great examples of wonderful institutions that do amazing work in the recidivism area, in drug treatment, and everywhere else. ATCs, the adult transitional centers. If you look at the numbers at adult transitional centers, they're typically smaller prisons. They're typically better staffing ratios as a result, so more one-on-one contact with sort of folks that can help mentor and model here's how to live a productive life. They can give them tools that actually put them into the community and allow them to have jobs while they're incarcerated. And that has meant a very, very steep drop in recidivism in those areas. So, unfortunately in Illinois, in our ultimate wisdom, 6 years ago, we closed most of those ATCs. And what we should do is we should be opening more and more and more of them. So, that's just one example, but I think a good one.
Yeah. Just sorry to interrupt. If the panelists could just make sure to hold the microphone pretty close to your mouths, just so that everyone in the back of the room can hear, that'd be great.
So sorry.
So I would love then so a couple things I'm hearing, just like one, this question of when you pull, because I know one of the probably polarized issues in our society is this question of social safety net, and are there these sort of services and benefits? That seems to be one thing that divides people. But one of the things I'm hearing from you, Caroline, is that the pulling of money away from those programs you're seeing as a gateway into a ballooning prison population. And then this other question, economic question of like, how do you deal with, well, prisons are providing jobs in many rural communities, and if you took that away, what would the impact of that be? How do you create other jobs to fill that, if that's what you were doing? And I just wanted to extend this a little bit about the economic question to George and to Tanya. Just a question about, in your own experience, what have you seen as sort of the economic impact on people who've been incarcerated and people who are coming out of that? Sort of like, what is sort of the economic impact that you've seen?
Wow, the economic impact. Well, that's pretty much.
George, I think they want to hold it up.
I'm sorry. Okay. Economic impact. Right now, at this moment, there's really none that I can vision right now. So I'm gonna pass this on to Tanya.
Go ahead.
I think that, first of all, I think that the question, are you a convicted felon, should be taken off of an application. I don't think that should have any bearing on the abilities of an individual. An inmate is someone's mother, someone's child, someone's brother, someone's sister, with the capabilities just like any other human being. Prisons, in my opinion, I've been there 7 times, and in my opinion, I think they are a business. I believe that prisons capitalize off people's shortcomings. And I believe that people are funneled in and out of the prisons because, like Carolyn said, the programs are being depleted. You're taking, for instance, a mentally ill person that doesn't receive the mental health treatment that they need because of financial strain in society. And then you put them in prison because the voices tell them to do something. And they're punished because of an illness that they cannot financially pay to treat. So now you've got a person who's not a criminal in an institution where there are criminals, and they're funneling in and out of the system. When the prisons release this person, they give them a blister pack with 7 days of medication and send them on their way. They don't, and that's it. And once that blister pack runs out and that person doesn't have the ability to cope without that medication, they become manic or distraught, and then they start reverting back to old behaviors, which lands them back in the same situation, which keeps all of our COs employed. It keeps more reasons to build prisons. Mass incarceration, in my opinion, does not work. I have, I've never had a problem finding a job because I'm very skilled, I'm very smart, and I'm very driven. So when I want something, I go out and I get it. Most people aren't like that. Some people, they give up. I have a personal relationship with you, I think I know. And so, I've been through the system quite a bit, but my past doesn't reflect who I am today. I don't allow that to define my character. I fall, but I don't stay down. And I think that economically, prisons are a waste of money. I think that we spend a lot more money building prisons, and we can't even man some of these prisons. For instance, the Thomas prison. We built this prison, we never opened it, the feds bought it, and it's still not full. And this is a situation that creates strain on this community. You've got people who aren't used to this type of environment, who aren't used to heavy real criminals coming through their tight-knit neighborhood. And now you've got people who are scared. We've got more locked doors, we've got more paranoia, and it's sad because everyone is affected by this. Not in so many areas. You've got a person who, me personally, I suffered an addiction. All of my criminal behavior was fueled by a disease, a treatable disease that I was denied treatment for up until 5 years ago. So I think that there needs to be more diversion programming. I think that they need to not look so hard into who is this person and what has this person done and should they receive treatment. Has this person had a domestic violence issue in the past? Oh, they don't get treatment. No, they need treatment, and they need treatment no matter what they did. So I feel like instead of looking at the charge and looking at the past charges, they need to look at the individual that's standing in front of them. And they need to base their sentencing and their decisions on that person, not on what they did 10 years ago, not on what they did 5 years ago, what they did right now and why they did it. Because there's more reasons for why people do things than just they did it.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm hearing just a few things out of that. Like one, this issue of economic sort of, if you're coming in a position where maybe you have an addiction and you're not able to pay for treatment, then that in and of itself is an economic issue, like lack of resources leading to that gateway. And then also I just wanted to underline the first thing you said too, which was taking that if you have are you a convicted felon on a job application, what does that do to your likelihood of being able to get a job and support yourself sort of economically too, right? Well, I wanted to go back to this question, and we've been sort of raising, and Caroline, I'm going to start with you again, is just this thing that you said to me about 80% of the people who are in prison shouldn't be there. And I just want to take up that, like, well, who are those people? Why are they there? And why shouldn't they be?
Sure. And I think my 80% quote was dealing with the women's population, because that's what I've dealt with for like the last 15 years. I'm not saying that it's any different for the male population. I think it's probably a little bit higher only because of the violent offenses possibly, and not that that means that we should incarcerate all of them for a long time. It just means a different treatment method. Oh, sorry. And so I've worked with the women pretty much my whole career, on and off, but pretty consistently for about 16 to 17 years. I've worked with them because I think when I worked with the women's population, they were very receptive to the things and the programming and the things that we did. Some of the things that were, I guess, most astonishing is that our recidivism rate for the women right now is 26%, which is pretty good. It's not the best, but it's better than it was. The women's population has been declining since 2007. We have about 2,300 women right now. 50% of those women will go home in 18 months or less. So here's the twist when you look at that. So we're not recycling the same people all the time. I mean, yes, we do have some repeat offenders, but at a very low rate, the 26% rate. So we're constantly recycling new people into the system, mostly because I think kind of what Tanya said is that the social services aren't there for them. Their economic resources for them to do those things are not there. And so when they come to prison, then in the women's division, we're lucky enough to have a lot of those resources for substance abuse and the mental health. We're probably one of the best staffed mental health correctional facilities in the state of Illinois. For some reason, everybody wants, the mental health staff want to come work with the women. And so we're very successful in that area for them to get treatment. But I still go back to the fact that almost 80% of the population that are incarcerated are women are in for drug charges or something related to a drug or substance abuse charge. They're not there for a violent offense. We should be, like Eddie said, doing more adult transitional centers for the women. I have 130 beds for the women. I could fill a work release center time again and time and again and time and again. The women do very well there. They get employment. They save their money. They figure out how to budget. They figure out where they're going to live. They usually keep the jobs that they start with at the work release center. Well over 20% of the women who work at the work release center that I manage are supervisors. So those are the things that I think are best spent, and I don't think that the resources, at least in the area that I supervise, are well spent. I think the women could be in adult transitional centers. They could be day reporting centers. They could be in diversionary drug treatment court diversionary programs and those types of things. So.
And I agree with everything Carolyn said. I would, I think from this vantage, whatever the right number, and I don't know what the right number of who should be incarcerated and who shouldn't is, what we see currently in the system are an entire population with acute needs in a whole host of areas, mental health, drug treatment. We've talked about a lot of them. And so, again, as we make whatever the pivot is, we need to be very careful and thoughtful about, like, if we do all these things and we get these other places open, that doesn't mean that we don't need a maximum security prison, and it doesn't mean that maximum security prison shouldn't be fully staffed, because some of the deficiencies in the current system, and I'm totally aware and very sort of sensitive to exactly what you said. You triage. They triage currently who they can put through a program because they just don't have enough resources to provide the program for everybody, and so they make these choices. Where if we had a lower population, a higher staffing ratio, a higher programming ratio in those prisons, we'd be able to do better in all cases, in the ATCs and in, the full lockup facilities. So I think that's one thing to think about. We mentioned it earlier, I just want to keep this thread in mind because I think it's really important. Compare $100 a day to $775 a day, because the questions we're asking is what does anybody get out of the resources that the taxpayers are providing? And what I would say is, the Illinois system is doing as well as it can with the very limited amount of resources that they have. If they had, like, when you compare that to some of the Chicago diversionary programs that I'm aware of, actually, they're great ideas. But when you look at how much money they cost and how little we can see an actual sort of tangible benefit, and by that I mean we just don't force them to track things. We don't know, is somebody reoffending? Are they not? Or what are we getting out of this? And if we just decide we're going to throw that money out kind of to all these various interests, I'm not sure we're going to get what we hope we're paying for. So those through lines are important. Making sure that there's accountability for the taxpayers' dollar is important. In Illinois, we have a Private Prison Moratorium Act, so we actually don't have to worry about a private prison coming in and just profiting off inmates. We have the luxury, really, of having, I think, a much better, more refined conversation about where do these limited dollars, where will they best serve the population that we're responsible for. So.
I think so. Can I just ask you to educate the audience for a second about the moratorium, because I certainly know we have this statistic about private prisons, a lot of which has arisen around immigration as well. And so you could just tell people what that act is.
So I'm so very proud of my union. So a quick 2-second blurb. It was AFSCME that did this. And years ago, about 15, 20 years ago, it was in the 90s, so many more years. I'm much older than I think I am. But we ran a bill that said you cannot have a private prison in the state of Illinois. And that bill was embraced by both houses. It was signed by the governor, and it has been the law of the land ever since. And what that means is you can't open the judge will get some kickbacks if he puts enough kids in the system type thing. You just can't do that in Illinois. It is all driven by our societal justice system, and there's very little. There's some points of entry for people to try to profit off of that system, but for the most part, it's a fully government-run system. That has its own set of issues, of course, but it's much more efficient when you look at it just from a dollars and cents view.
Great, thank you. So I think I want to move us to a question that I want us to spend some time on, which is just the human cost of the people who are being incarcerated and what that looks like. I think we know disproportionately or percentage-wise, it's more black and brown people. It's more people who've come from poverty. It's more people who've come from issues with addiction and mental health, or just other services that were needed. So keeping that in mind, one of the things George and Tanya, I want to read you something here and then ask you maybe to respond a little bit from your own. One of the things I was surprised by when I started doing research on this topic is I thought there would be a sort of conservative liberal divide, that some people were more for them and some were not. And what I quickly discovered was that pretty much across the political spectrum, everybody was sort of questioning it. The value of it, maybe looking at different questions. And so what I wanted to read, and it's in your program if you want to follow along, it's from the National Review, which is a conservative publication that's actually pretty strong around issues of law and order. And so I just want to read this about the cost of prisons for them, and then ask Tanya and George to sort of respond. It's on page 6 in your program. It's an excerpt from Prisoners Without Prisons from the National Review in 2015. Even though wrongdoers may deserve to have the book thrown at them, it is not always wise to exact the full measure of justice. There is evidence that prison turns people into career criminals. On the one hand, it cuts prisoners off from family, friends, and neighbors who give them reasons to follow the law. Responsibilities as husbands and fathers are key factors that tame young men's wildness and encourage them to settle down. One longitudinal study found that marriage may reduce reoffending by 35%. But prison makes it difficult to maintain families and friendships. Visiting in person is difficult and time-consuming. Prisons are often far away, and telephone calls are horrifically expensive. On the other hand, prison does much to draw inmates away from lawful work. In the month before their arrest, roughly 3/4 of inmates were employed, earning the bulk of their income lawfully. Many were not only taking care of their children, but helping to pay for rent, groceries, utilities, and health care. But prison destroys their earning potential. Prisoners lose their jobs on the outside, and felony convictions also disqualify ex-cons from certain jobs, housing, student loans, and voting. Michigan economics professor Michael Mueller-Smith finds that spending a year or more in prison reduces the odds of post-prison employment, a year more in prison reduces the odds of post-prison employment by 24% and increases the odds of living on food stamps by 5%. So finally, conversely, prisons are breeding grounds for crime. Instead of working to support their own families and their victims, most prisoners are forced to remain idle. Instead of having to learn vocational skills, they have too much free time to hone criminal skills and connections. And instead of removing wrongdoers from criminogenic networks, prison clusters together neophytes and experienced recidivists, breeding gangs, criminal networks, and more crime. Thus, Mueller-Smith finds long sentences on average breed much more crime after release than they prevent during the sentence. Any benefit from locking criminals up temporarily is more than offset by the crime increases caused when prisons turn small-timers into career criminals. So conservatives' emphasis on retribution and responsibility, even when morally warranted, can quickly become counterproductive. So George, Tanya, you don't have to agree with all of that. You may have some pushback or you may agree, but just curious to hear, in your own experience, thoughts on the impact, the costs to people who have been incarcerated or coming out of that.
Well, I kind of like agree with what Tanya was saying. I mean, to me, now it's just me, we waste the taxpayers' money, which is you guys, because don't look like none of you guys been locked up. Well, I ain't seen none of y'all when I was locked up anyway. But I mean, though, but for real though, right? I mean, if it was like more resources, the average individual, the average time when I went to jail, I have too been to the prison time 7 times. Most of the time, every time that I went, it was due to substance abuse. Most of the peoples that I hung around with was substance abuse or mental issues, like you had said. I mean, if maybe when they come in and they focus more on their needs, you know what I mean? Most of the individuals that I got incarcerated with, most of them didn't even know how to spell their own name. And I was like, that's a need that the prisons do. Come in, we're going to teach you how to spell your name. Give you some type of skill set so you don't return to crime. We're going to give you some type of health, mental health issues to help you understand why you do what you do. They taking out all the resources, education. I remember once upon a time, used to be able to get maybe an associate's degree. Now it's, they're about to take out the GED courses in school as well. So, I mean, to me, it's just really a waste of the taxpayers' money, which is what they're actually doing. Like you said, Tanya, it's like a game more or less, a business, you know what I mean? I don't know, I can't explain it right now because I'm kind of like getting caught up because that was like real touchy to me, right? And I always used to wonder, why do I keep coming in and out of jail? It's supposed to be corrections. The correction facility, I'm not getting corrected. I'm steady doing the same old thing, insanity, expecting a different result. You know what I mean? I just couldn't understand it, right? And like you too, I went through a program in prison. I finally got help. They finally said, well, you're not as bad as we think you are because you come in and out of jail. We're going to allow you to go in the program. And once I got the chance to understand my reasons for doing what I was doing through the disease of addiction, I decided, hey, man, no, not anymore. I won't help keep you employed. Maybe somebody else will, but George won't. You know what I mean? And I actually learned that I actually had a problem, disease of addiction. So once I conquered that, which prison?
You said you went to a treatment program prison.
The program prison was in Jacksonville.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Can I get Serge? You want to say something before Tanya
I was
takes?
going to ask him. So it was the program that really gave you light to help you understand what you were doing wrong to turn the other way. Because you said you made a conscious decision to change. And that was in the program that you realized that? Or was there more?
It was the program along with other things. I mean, it was like 17, 18-year-old kids, you know what I'm saying, coming in behind me, and I was saying to myself, those can be my kids. And I didn't want to be nobody dead in jail. And it seemed like that's what all I was doing. I was coming in there and they was like, oh man, you been here several times, man. How this go, how that go? And I was like finding myself, like teaching them how to be better criminals, right? And grateful to the program, I learned that that is not the message that I need to be portraying. So I started off in prison telling them, hey, let's sign up for school. Well, you can't read, I'm gonna help you read. You know what I'm saying? I even took my commissary, my own personal money, and like, I'm gonna provide you with this. I started helping them set goals. Okay, if you get in school, I'll buy you a pair of shorts. I'll buy you this, I'll buy you that. So some just clicked in me and it decided to change. And as I was helping myself to change, I was changing other individuals. So.
Thank you.
I think me, myself, prison didn't change me. It made me a worse person, I would have to say.
Tony, can I get you to hold it up
yeah.
this side here?
I started going to prison when I was 18 years old for drugs. I came from a drug-infested household. It was never really looked at as there was nothing wrong with cocaine in my home. I was raised around it. Everybody did it. Nobody reaped repercussions from it. But I was different. I was different than everyone else. I couldn't do cocaine like everyone else. And that made me angry because I was different. And so I learned how to adapt to being a different person. And I found myself becoming a survivor in a world of addiction. And I found myself, I'm very competitive. And I've been competitive my whole life. And I always want to be the best one doing whatever we're doing. So if I was a drug addict, I was the best drug addict out there. If I was, going to school, I was the smartest one in the class. And I found myself doing that. And I went to prison. I went to rehab 17 times. I went to Wells program in Dwight. I was, the little superstar girl. And I always was really well. I always did well in a structured environment. If you put me in a structured environment, I can do, A, B, C, D. Once you rip me out of structure, I become freaked out, like I freak out. That's how it used to be. Now, this last time, when I got clean about almost 5 years ago now, I was put in a position for drugs again in Will County where the same people who sent me to prison over and over and over and over again, and I hated them so much for doing that to me. And they ripped me away from my family, and my mom didn't drive, so she had to get someone to pay someone to come out, and it was always so far, and I didn't see my kids because I didn't want my children in that, environment. So I tried to make some more selfless choices as a mother, and being incarcerated. However, when they presented me with the program, the ARI Prison Diversion Program, I thought it was a joke. I couldn't believe they were giving me the program. And they told me that I had been
Instead of being incarcerated.
Instead of being incarcerated. And, I'm one of those people where I go hard. I go hard or not at all. And there's no gray with me, with anything, which is part of the addictive personality, I guess. But anyway, they said, do you want to be in this program? And I was like, I don't know yet, and I said, I'm not sure. And they were flabbergasted. I can't believe we're giving her an opportunity to not go to prison, and she's might go anyway, And the reason is because the first time you go to prison, you're like in shock. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to prison. But you become conditioned, just like anything else. Once you get there and you realize that you're not going to die there, it's like a routine. It becomes something that you can handle. And a woman, I know for me, I'm very resilient. Coming from where I come from and going through what I've been through, I can bounce back pretty quick, and so I've become conditioned to that environment. So I go there, I do my time, I come out, I go right back to the same old thing. And that's what happened to me. And it became, it was redundant. Like I was just in and out, in and out, in and out. And it was no big deal. I got to the point where if I went to prison, I would break up with my boyfriend and, I'll send you a letter. I'd send a couple dollars home to the kids every week or whatever, $2 money orders and stuff. And, and it just was it was like a job almost, going to prison. And when
you're just feeling the revolving door, the thing that's happening.
And I got used to getting, obtaining things and then losing them, obtaining things and losing them. And I got tired of losing everything, I'm 44 years old now, and I'm still struggling to gain things in my life. And I've been sober a long time. and I've been through a lot of pain as a sober person. Being sober is hard when you know nothing else. I think I lost track. For me, when they gave me the opportunity to get better, I didn't know if I wanted to get better because it was too hard. I was going to have to work. I was going to have to really do something different. And I was shocked. Like, I didn't know if I could do it. And so, one person told me, I don't think you can do it. That's all it took. I was like, I'm taking the program. So they challenged me. I rose to the occasion, and I became this person, and I've gotten really involved with prison diversion programming. It changed my life. It gave me hope. Hope will take a person like me a very long way. Now those same people that were locking me up and throwing away the key and turning their nose at me in the courthouse are embracing me. They embrace me. They love me. They think I'm a great person. I go into a courthouse now and it's like, hey, Tanya, how are you? Instead of, oh, there she goes. It's a whole different ballgame now. Yeah. And so it's kind of neat to be a different person and be looked at in a different eye. But yet, because of who I was before, I'm still criminalized for that person. That person is still there. And certain people still judge me for the person that I was. And it's unfortunate. So I think that, I struggle. I'm going to struggle. And the more I get, the more I want. I'm an addict. It's always going to be that way for me. But I think that I've learned how to accept things now, and I've learned the difference between what I need and what I want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I still want what I can't have, and I'm still a brat, and I still want all that stuff. But I found when I got sober that I was able to achieve a lot of things. I was able, I made $52,000 in 1 year as a waitress. I did exceptionally well in school. I'm very good at I just want to be good at stuff, And so I go out and I be good at it. And I don't let anyone tell me that I can't be good at it. People are going to judge me no matter what. And that's okay. As long as I keep doing the best that I can do with what I have and try a little bit harder the next day, I'm going to fall. I'm going to fall short all the time because God knows I've screwed up a lot. Right. But I have gained relationships in my life that I didn't have for 10 years. My son didn't talk to me for 10 years. Now we talk all the time,
That's awesome.
And so those are the blessings that come. So when you talk about prisons and jails and inmates and costs, you know what? There's no cost in the world that can take the place of my son. All the money that everyone spends on prison, to me, I think you need to create more programs, more diversion programming. You've got drug court, you've got mental health court, you've got veterans court.
Can we just talk about that in a little bit?
Sure.
I just want to follow up on something you just said and ask Carolyn to add to it, because this is something you talked about, was just this question of what Tanya was talking about the impact on children and families, and that was one of the things that you were sort of mentioning too, that might not be a thing that people typically think about, like what happens to children and families when people get incarcerated, what to the communities where people live. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. When men go to prison, they leave behind their children as well, but they're usually not the primary caregiver. The mother's usually still involved, and that's who's taking care of the child. So when women come into prison, where do the children go? 80% of the women have children when they come into our custody. They go to grandma, they go to aunt, they go to us, if they have an older sibling, or they go to DCFS, Lutheran Social Services. So that family is broken. Sometimes the children are separated. If there's multiple brothers and sisters, they're separated because somebody won't take 3 or 4 kids, or even 2 kids, and so then they're separated. Then what compounds that even more is that we locate prisons 4 hours mostly from where everybody's from. So travel to take those children to visit their mother becomes a struggle. We've tried to do other things like video visitation to try to help that, but it's still a visit in between. The television's not a connection. What we really believe in, obviously, and the statistics show, is that we can maintain that bond with their kids. That's a stronger reason for them not to come back to prison, and it's a help for those children, because the children then have many risk factors associated with them when one of their parents comes to prison. They have anxiety, they suffer from aggression, they're embarrassed sometimes because their friends ask where their mom or their dad is, and they don't want to tell them that they're incarcerated. So trying to break that cycle. some of the things that we do in the women's division, obviously, depending on the sentence that the woman's given, if they come to prison pregnant, they're able to keep their child with them for between 2 and 3 years. And so we're able to keep that bond with their child. And then if they have other kids, those kids can come in and visit on, you know, after hours, on weekends and stuff. And so then they can all kind of bond as a family on the wing. You know, we do some extra programming where the kids come in and have like day camp experiences with their mom. You know, we kind of expand the visiting room and the play areas. We try to do the things we can to keep that bond, but you know, the real cost of incarceration on people is if they have kids, their kids and their families, that we take them long distances away. When we closed Dwight, which was less than 2 hours from the city, you know, people were able to visit more often. Not that I'm suggesting that we go build a prison near Chicago so they can visit, but I'm just saying, you know, that's one thing we struggle with, why we figure out all the other things years down the road. Now we moved it to Logan, which makes it 3.5 hours. And then sometimes they travel all that way and then they can't get in, or there's, you know, some kind of conflict or something happens, or the paperwork's not right or whatever. And then Decatur's even farther away. So obviously the families suffer. So I'm on the 9th hour probably.
No, that's good. Well, I want to just kind of keep this moving, but I wanted to, Eddie, get you a chance to talk about, because I think we've talked about corrections officers and people sort of staffing the prisons, and primarily talked about job security and those being good jobs. But you also talked a little bit, and I was hoping you would talk about the cost to them, whether they're personal, emotional, whatever those might be.
So we have you know, somebody who's lived it in the audience, and I'm sure she has, you know, personal experience. I can tell you from this vantage in helping advocate for those folks. You know, prison changes everybody. It changes the folks that are incarcerated. It changes the people who are responsible for security. It changes folks who do ancillary services, nurses and educators, and, you know, folks who come into the prison, volunteers who come into the prison. It is a very strange and different environment for most folks, and so it has a profound impact, even if it's a positive one. And there are cases volunteers feel very, you know, sort of proud of the work they do, and they should, because you change lives by virtue of coming in and helping. So thank you for that. But, you know, I think there are just some statistics that are interesting. So, you know, correctional officers, people that work in a correctional environment have PTSD rates. This is a recent study, very, very clear, very scientifically driven, very good data that says that their PTSD rates are exactly the same as folks who are returning from a combat zone that have been in active duty military service. So that's the kind of sort of intense stress that people are under just working in this environment. So I think that's something that's really important to remember. I don't, you know, please don't feel sorry for correctional officers. They get to go home, you know, at the end of their usually 16-hour shift because there's so few staff that they end up getting mandated to work overtime just about every time they show up. But I digress. They do get to leave. But they're, you know, look, they're locked up while they're at work, and that's a real profound impact. I'm just the union guy, but I can give you one example. The first 6 months I was working for AFSCME, there's a protocol where when there's a hostage crisis, we have a function that we perform along with operations. We basically look out for staff needs, like, you know, they got folks who got to get kids from school and they got to eat and stuff like that. When there's a hostage crisis, the facility gets locked down, right, so that you can control ingress and egress. And so I'm racing actually with a police escort at like 88 miles an hour in my union car to go into a prison that's about to be locked down. And I call my wife and I'm like, hey, I'm going to Pinckneyville. I'm not sure when I'll be home. Well, why not? There's a hostage crisis. Well, what? I was like, what are you doing? You're just the union guy, right? I was like, yeah, well, apparently there's a whole protocol and stuff I got to do. And we got to set up a press house and we got to do so anyway. I only say that to say it affects all of us that are you know, kind of anywhere around it, and you know, it's important to remember that. I think by virtue, and then I'll shut up, but you know, by virtue of being a publicly responsive department as opposed to, and I want to just keep talking about the private versus public thing because I think it's important. There's so much more ability to intrude in the operation when it's government run as opposed to private sector through all kinds of means, whether that's a union that can advocate for employees, whether that's an outside advocate or, you know, volunteer group that can say, hey, we need to be doing this for inmates, whether it's lawsuits brought by inmates, Rasho, Lightfoot. There have been lawsuits filed over the last many, many years that have specifically targeted areas where the department has been deficient or has struggled, and it has forced that into sort of the air, and it has forced the department to deal with it. It has given inmates and staff some points of entry to advocate for their own issues, and I think in the aggregate has been a very positive development. A lot of the things you guys are talking about, thank goodness you haven't been around the last 5-7 years. They've been trying. You know, we're not anywhere near where we need to be in that system, but you know, there is more sort of, as soon as you are incarcerated now, as soon as you arrive in an NRC, they evaluate you in every way, who you are as a person, and they try to figure out who you are as a person and what do you need, right? And so they're much better, I think, at really kind of targeting the very limited resources that they do have in ways that they can. So I just think, you know, in the aggregate, remembering that we're folks, all of us, and that we have our own sort of mental health needs is a critical component in sort of, you know, continuing to move the correctional environment where we'd like to see it go.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note something. I was struck by you saying that about the PTSD rates among it just makes you think, you know, whenever you watch a documentary on returning veterans, it's always about how that PTSD also affects their marriages and their families. I'm assuming there's a personal effect to that in their families, but also I don't know how that would affect how they are with inmates or with, but I'm guessing that also has.
So I'm just going to very briefly say it absolutely affects both places. I'm going to stay to the family side. These guys can talk about how it affects them, but on the family side of things, you know, we see a lot of alcoholism. You know, we see domestic situations, whether that's battery or, you know, anger, you know, expressed outside of the prison system because they can't do it while they're at work. And a whole host of other sort of real deep, you know, needs that are expressed through behaviors, even for staff. We try, the union tries. We've got employee assistance programs. We're working in concert with the state to build a staff wellness response team so that we can kind of go and try to better target and deliver services there, you know, to support staff so that they're not in turn, you know, lashing out just in general in their lives, whether that's toward inmates or toward their families. So, but absolutely huge impacts, no doubt about it.
George, do you want to say anything about relationships between corrections officers and inmates and how that?
I mean, it's kind of like you have some officers that really concerned and care about you, but you like got this shield up like, I'm an inmate, you're an officer. Man, no offense, you're white, I'm black. You don't know me. You don't understand my struggle. You go home, I sit here, and you know, it's a whole lot. It's a lot. I mean, like you said, the stress on the officer, the post-traumatic stress on the officer, as well as the inmate. Part of my job, and I took on job as an inmate, is these kids trying to get them to understand that they're like, hey, why my family don't love me? Why I can't get a letter? Why I can't make a phone call? Why they keeping me locked up this long when I got like kid? You committed a crime. You know what I'm saying? This is what you do. You know what I'm saying? This is what you get. You don't think it all the way through. You know what I mean? I'm quite sure somebody told you, man, hey, if you go out there and shoot this lady, man, and rob these peoples, man, eventually you're gonna get caught. You know what I'm saying? It's fun and game when you get away with it, or you see somebody, and most of these kids, right, and I tell them, like, in my work, I tell them, hey, man, you ain't got to do that. I did that already. But most of them are visionaries. You can't tell them nothing. They got to actually experience it. Hey, the fire's hot, man. You touch that fire, you're going to burn yourself. How you know? Because I burned myself. And then here you go. Oh, you ready? Come on, dude. I mean, wake up, dude. You don't got to do it. Right. I did that. And it's, I mean, they're like already struggles, they barriers that they have at home and on the streets, and then come in there and they're locked up and they just lose it. Dude, I don't, you know what I'm saying? It's like reality set in. Dude, I don't have no one to care for me. So.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Kind of a comment to go along with that. And I think it's really important, too, to look at the population that we are incarcerating and how you're saying a lot of them are adolescents. I mean, that 18 to 24 range when your brain is not fully developed yet. I mean, your brain is still developing up until you're 26. And so looking at that and then going back and looking, like you said, at the home environment, too. I mean, prevention plays a huge role in all of it, that if there's not that familiar support for whatever reason, lack of resources or whatnot, I mean, they're going to turn. And when you're 18 to 24, you have full functioning. You're an adult. You have a full brain, but your impulse control is just not there. And so without the proper guidance, like you said, that's just what they're going to turn to. And then again, which goes back to looking at, is it a violent crime versus a nonviolent crime and all of that. But I think prevention plays a huge role in looking at what services we need to be delivering to help preventing these people from getting into prison and then turning into, like you said, career criminals.
Well, it's a good question is the prevention before they get incarcerated, before they get arrested. How can we change society to help them understand right from wrong and not to do this? It's almost like we have a bigger society that doesn't know what's right and wrong anymore.
Yeah, so let's take out, because I want to turn us in a minute to this question of, like, what should we be doing if prisons aren't the answer, or the way what are some things we should be doing? But I want to just take up this question first of what George referred to and what you're referring to of who are the people making this up. And I sort of mentioned this earlier. I think we know if you have black or brown skin, it doesn't make you more likely to commit a crime than a person with white skin. Nonetheless, I think it's something like, I think the statistics we were looking at was something like 60% of the population, I don't know if it's in Illinois or nationwide, was sort of like 63% were white and made up 40-something% of the prison population. So kind of proportionate to the population overall. Then if you looked at black people, it was like made up 16% of the population and 40% of the prison population. And you could look at the statistics for Native Americans, you could look at for Latinos, it's just, it's the same thing. If you're black and brown, you're more likely to be in prison. And I just want to ask a question, what do we think, what do we make of that?
I actually, the first time I went to prison, I was very young, and you're right. Most of the population was black or brown skin inmates. As a white person or Caucasian, I felt very out of place because I was raised to believe that that's what prisoners were. Poverty-stricken, low-income housing. I didn't come from a place where there was housing authorities and poverty-stricken. I was middle class. And now, 20 years later, like you said, most of the female population is Caucasian females. And a lot of those females are young, come from, good homes, and are driven by a opiate addiction, from what I've seen. And opiates is taking a huge toll on our society as far as the female population goes. And it's like, do we put them in prison or do we let them die? Is where we're at now with that. And that's a whole other thing for me. I think it starts with education. I think we all need to take some responsibility as parents, as people in society, as people who care about the next person. I care about you, you're right next to me. You care about her, she's right next to you. And this has to be like a thing where we all make a difference. We all do something to make someone a little bit better. It doesn't have to, the world has gotten so cold now compared to what it was 20 years ago.
Can I ask you just personally, because I want to get into this question of racial disparities and one of why there are more black and brown people disproportionately in prison. So I'm curious about the comment you just made about you were raised to believe. I mean, were you saying you were raised to believe there's certain people who make up the prison population and it's not the white folks like us?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I also want to say too, like once you go to prison, whether you're black, brown, white, you don't receive a lot of services. Section 8's no longer an option, like they said, student loans. These are all things that, I don't know, I find it, everyone here is the same. It's not about skin color. And we've gone so far into that for so many years, and it's become a thing. Like if you go into a women's prison, and it's Black History Month, It's a thing, you know, and it's not about that, you know. It's about us all sticking together and standing for one common goal. And I believe the whole black-white thing is, it creates diversity and division, and, you know, it's teamwork makes the dream work, you know what I'm saying? And nobody gets that anymore. And it's gotten to be, it's not about that. It's not about race. It's about the issues that are driving all of us.
Well, so can I push into that? Because I think this is one of the questions I'm asking, like, how are issues of race and class affecting all of this? Like, and so one of the questions is, like, it does seem to be very much about race in terms of who is more likely to end up there. And so I just want to ask you to kind of comment on that.
I want to add real quick. It's, to me, it's always been about race. I mean, just like, to be totally honest with you guys, I came from Chicago, the West Side. On my way here, I got pulled over twice on Highway 88 en route from the city out here. And I was like totally recalled doing the speed limit, actually doing slower than the speed limit, right? Because it's just this thing, I got a thing about being pulled over with the officers actually try to do something to me or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's just something in my head, right? And I was thinking, when I pulled off in front of my house, I live in a prominently black neighborhood, and they sell drugs right down the street from my house. And I noticed the Caucasian young individuals that use the drugs, they used to come in the neighborhoods and have discrepancy hoods on their head. Now they just come in the neighborhood and buy their drugs or whatever, and you know what I'm saying, and hang out on the block, and hey man, you got a cigarette? Sorry sir, I don't smoke. You know what I mean? And it's like the police see them, know what they're actually doing, because you can tell an individual that's using drugs. You know what I'm saying? No matter what color you is. And the police will see him and ride right past him. But they'll target me. If I come in a Caucasian community, they'll target me. They'll stop me. I mean, I'm a real big Cubs fan, the greatest baseball team in the world. But also, I wear my Cubs hat. It's because everybody loved the Cubs. And I figure, hey, if they see me with a Cubs hat, they'll be like, oh, that's a Cubs fan. He's not on no trouble. But if I come in a Caucasian neighborhood without my Cubs hat on, I'm liable to get stopped. Me, a Latino with substance, get stopped. What are you doing over here? Especially if it's a nice, fairly nice neighborhood like this one. What are you doing here? Obviously, he's here to commit a crime. So, I mean, even, you know what I'm saying? I'm being judged based on my skin color. We're being judged based on brown and black. I mean, it's not everybody, but society. It's reality. It's true. It's still, that's what's happening today.
So. Yeah, thank you.
I just have to, I've never had your experience, my brother. You're exactly right to point that out. But I do want to share just a personal story. You shared one, I'll share one. Absolutely. So I just bought this used Cadillac. Got myself a nice black Cadillac. Never had a nice car before. I got pulled over 4 times in the first week that I was driving my new black Cadillac in my own little hometown, Belleville, Illinois. It's just across the river from St. Louis. And as soon as they saw I was a white guy, guess who didn't get a ticket? 4 times. This guy, right? So, like, I'm a white guy. I will just say systemic racism exists. Sexism exists. It is a fact. It is promulgated and perpetuated by a lot of our systems and structures in this society, and I don't have any answers, but I think that acknowledging that as, you know, those of us in that particular white part of the culture, we need to talk about it, we need to acknowledge it, and we need to do everything we can to smash it everywhere we see it. I mean, I think that's just the fundamental truth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really struck by the way what you're sharing, and the cost of that really implicates all of us, and the question of how are you educating your children, how are you conditioning them around these issues, yeah, and just then what is the stigma that's attached, or what are the prejudice that's attached to people and the impacts of that when they come in communities. Do you want to say anything about this? Are you good?
That's all right.
We finally wrapped me completely up in this.
We were trying to strangle him. Well, a couple things. One, I can add a story. I live in Rushville, Illinois, which historically, Rushville, Beardstown, that area has historically been a predominantly white area, but because of industry that's come in there and agriculture, we have a wide variety of culture there now, it's a great thing. I was with my stepson. He was coming home from Dot Foods for work, and he got pulled over by the police officer. And the police officer came to the car, and when he saw we were white, he was like, "Well, I don't really going to give you a ticket." He was like, "But we have to pull so many white people over, or we look like we're racist." I mean, that's what was said. So I was just like, and my dad was a police officer, so law enforcement's near and dear to me, and so that kind of hurt me because it reflects poorly on people. There are a lot of good police officers. There's a lot of good correctional staff. There's a lot of good people in every profession, but people like that, then they give everybody a bad name, and it makes it hard to deal with. And I think on top of that, just to say that, in the correctional field, and we're trying really hard to change our culture in the corrections world and treat everybody like a person. Like we want to treat offenders, those who are incarcerated with us, like we would want to be treated. They're no different. They're sentenced to a crime. They were sentenced for a crime that they did, and they have to be with us for whatever the said period. It's not for us to judge them farther. It's not for us to impose more discipline, unnecessarily, pain, suffering, cruelty. And I guess, and to defend part of that is that I started 30 years ago as an officer, and so I understand that although I didn't do my job like that, we were definitely taught that we were better than the people we were supervising, that we were there to make their life miserable so that they didn't come back. A lot of rhetoric in the early days. So, I understand how hard it is for us to change that culture now, because that's been ingrained for so many years that individuals don't know a different way, because they're like, but we've been taught that this is the way for generations that we do it. And so undoing that damage is incredibly hard. We're making some progress, and I think a lot of that's because people like me are aging out and leaving. And so we have new generations of individuals which have their own challenges in other areas like electronics and digital media type stuff. But I think the generations behind us seem to be more blind to color and differences. And I think that's a positive thing that we can take away from the new generation, even though sometimes we don't understand them and they irritate us. But I think that's something that I see, having supervised a lot of younger kids now, is that, they want to know how they can be helpful or what they can do or how they can be more of a part of what we're doing. So I think that's a positive thing as we go along.
Awesome. Keep the mic, because so how I want to kind of close this out, and I want to leave some time for questions, is just, so there's a big movement in Chicago around what was referred to as prison abolition. So the idea that what we need to really do is just get rid of prisons and need to have conversations about what really makes us safe, what really creates public safety, and is it really prisons or is it something else? So what do we need instead of that? And what was interesting to me is that I think for many people that's a very interesting question. Other people are like, what? That's crazy. Who thinks that's a good idea? How would you ever do that? And so when I talked to Carolyn the first time, because of Carolyn's role, I think, I made this assumption that she would think that was ridiculous. So when I asked her, can you envision a world without prisons? She immediately said yes, and then started to tell me the things that you would have instead. So I think what I'd like to do is, just as we close out, to go down and have each of you just say, what do we need? If we're trying to envision a world that's at least not just prisons, what do we concretely need instead? And then we'll open it up to the crowd.
Sure. And I think, those are some of the things that I've already kind of touched on, we've all touched on, is that we need more services, more programmatic services. We need more economic development in our areas. We need the resources and the people to help people retain jobs, start jobs, be entrepreneurs. We need more mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, ability to get those services and link those services. And so when I say I can envision not having prisons, I can envision that we have something, but it's not a prison. It's, we don't refer to it as a prison or a place where we incarcerate people, but it's a place where we help people, and that we're not making people worse.
You're focus on improvement.
Yeah, I'm focusing on improvement, and I think, you know, it'll be a very long time before we get there. Probably won't maybe see it in my lifetime even, but I think the changes are starting because, as Kelly said, even on both sides, whether somebody is very conservative or very liberal or somewhere in between, everybody's saying this isn't what we're doing is not working, and what can we do to better service that? So I think, you know, for me, it's still the programming aspect of it, it's the economic aspect of it. It's all the things that we have stripped from our communities, especially small communities, that we need to go back and work on.
Okay, thank you.
So for me, I think, and this may shock all of you, but I'm pretty progressive in my politics and just in general. You know, abolition, I've heard the term, I understand what it means. I guess I'm kind of with Carolyn. I view a society where we don't talk about prisons, but we certainly value institutional help for our citizens. You know, I think no matter what we do, we're going to ignore some segment of the population as we historically have. And you know, depending on the era, depending on the time, we stigmatize something. Sometimes, you know, mental health, it's asylum, sometimes it's drinking, sometimes it's women with the vapors, sometimes it's just whole segments of the population, right? It's whatever it is, and we decide that's bad, put that away, never talk about it again, we don't want to look at it, we don't want to think about it, and all those people are dirty. And yeah, and we stigmatize, we have a tendency, in this country especially, maybe it's because we come from a Puritan and, you know, sort of upbringing, I don't know, but like, we stigmatize things, we judge them, and then we don't give them resources because those people don't deserve it. And I think that's just completely wrong-headed. We have to be very clear-minded. We have to be very honest about what we're seeing, and when we see a need, we should try to fill it as society. We should use our common resources to do the best we can for everybody. I'm a big fan of Paul Wellstone. He used to say, we all do better when we all do better. I believe that. You know, another sort of hero of mine, again, this may seem crazy to all of you. It's crazy to me. It's certainly crazy to people to know me. I love Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers talks about looking for the helpers, right? He says, whatever terrible thing is happening around you, look for the helpers. And I really think that if we viewed our government as the helpers and stopped vilifying everything that happens from the public sector and looked at it as, you know, these are the only folks willing to help. You know, you may have problems with the prison system. I certainly do. But in some cases, you know, you've mentioned that that's where they get 3 hots and a cot, some segment of our population. That's the only people who can help them in their particular situation. So we just need to be better at identifying what those needs are and then delivering on those needs without all the judgment.
Great. So George, same question. What's something we need to do instead?
I mean, it pretty much sums it up. I mean, resources, services. I mean, especially in the city. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm one of the greatest guys of all time. More Georges out there. Just kidding. I mean, no, but I don't know. Mr. Rogers said the helpers. I mean, of course, they pay me very minimum for what I do, but outside of work, I do this 24/7. I'm forever outside trying to, you know what I'm saying, encourage a kid, a young lady, and I even more or less is I go out, by me being in recovery as well, I go out to the households and I try to educate the parents. You know what I mean? Because I'm a strong believer that it starts at home. So if I can educate as many as parents, encourage them, give them resources to a job or a treatment facility, you know what I'm saying, a mental health, I mean, it's just services, I guess. Sums it all up.
Tanya, but briefly, because we're going to get everybody in.
I got it. Okay. George, are you okay?
Thanks for that warning.
Get me arrested. There you go. I just want to say that I believe that, you know, we need to stop with the stigmatisms of all of it. We are in a society where there's people in let's say you have your profession, so to speak. You have a judge, you have a state's attorney, you have a public defender, you have an inmate, you're an offender. And you have a group of judges that go and they have a belief inside, and they see the big elephant in the room, but because of their personal, you know, their place in their profession, they don't talk about that elephant because it would taint what they do. It would be not looked upon as okay by their coworkers because that's not what they do. They sentence people to prison. That's their job, or to judge them people. So for them, people to take away the stigma or to give, actually look at the individual and care would be so different. And so we've gotten conditioned, again, to do what we do. Everyone has their place in the world that they do what they do. And nobody talks about the elephant. And I think that we need to take a look at that because...
And the elephant is what?
Is the offender or the problems. The problems that are here, we're not looking, we see them, but we don't talk about them.
We just focus on the individual.
Right, we sweep them under the rug and we just keep on going, doing what we know we do. We do what we think works or what society believes works instead of really focusing on the problems that need to be addressed and changing them. Everyone needs to work together, stop stigmatism, the stigmatisms of addicts and mental health people and all that. We're all human beings. We all need help. Every single one of us in this room, whether you're an addict or not, whether you're an offender or not, every single one of us in this room needs help sometimes.
Great.
And we all need to remember that. We're all human. And I think we need to remember that.
I love that. Yeah. I love that questioning. So let me just say, I want to open it up to questions, but I also, as we're doing it, if you're interested in answering the question that Carolyn raised at the beginning, I'm really curious to hear what people think, now that you've heard all of this, what role or part you think you might have to play as we think about these costs and addressing these costs. But if you also have questions for the panel, please feel free. Anybody want to? Yes. I'm going to try to pass this. Is that possible? Is this going to be crazy?
I think you're going to have to come up.
I'm used to talking. I'm a volunteer chaplain at the East Moline Correctional Center. And the rules and regulations, we only get to go in once every 3 months. Now when people come, it's open. Chapels are open. You can sign up if you're an inmate to come, or not. You don't have to. But those that come want more. And a lot of the inmates, maybe if we going out because it's a short-term place, but we try to minister to them, get them happily changing their mind, helping them see their conditions when they leave back home again so that they don't do what they did before to get where they are now and don't want to be. And they soak it up. But when you only see somebody once every 3 months, it's difficult. And because there are so many diverse religions throughout, they do offer many different kinds. They even have a Muslim group. But the whole thing is a lot of God has been taken out of everything. It's all institution. It's all this. You can't have God. And without that, you turn into people that aren't godly. And so you get what you get.
So from your perspective, like having more faith-based and also more consistent access.
Especially when so many want it.
No, that's all right. But I've seen a statistic that says 2% of prison populations are atheists. So that means 98% of prison population consider themselves of some religion. So I'm not sure that a lack of God is what is putting people in prison.
Yes,
sir. I spent 18 years as the Catholic chaplain to the Clinton County Jail, and I found that Muslims, atheists, Lutherans, Methodists, Catholics, whatever, they all like to come. But the key was that you had to be there every Sunday, Sunday after Sunday, because until they got to know you and could trust you and bring up a relationship, you weren't able to really help or work with them. The other side of it was I'd spend about quite a bit of time with the guards. And I think this is a neglected area. There needs to be chaplains for the police force and for the guards. They need that too. And I think that's neglected.
Other folks who want to get in. Let's get in the back first and then we'll come to you, sir.
I guess I'm the newbie of the chaplains. As a volunteer, luckily and blessed for us in Thomson, we can have weekly services and weekly Bible studies, which I think it's awesome. It is a lack of God. Like he said, everybody comes and everybody will listen. And even in my Spanish services, because that's what I do, the Spanish services, I have done English services too, and both get together to come and listen. And it does take for them to know you, to really trust you. Then you see the PTDs in all of them. In my first group, there were 50 men, Spanish immigrants, that they were brought there, ICE brought them there. 30 or 35 of them were taken from a job site, either a farm or a factory. 15 were just walking by to work and got targeted. 5 of them were actually offenders. So it is a racial thing, but it's also the lack of the families, the organization in the family, the guidance of the family. These are people that were the providers, their fathers, their husbands, their brothers, and their families in the places where they are from were lacking their help too. So it does an impact on the society, on the families, and most of them in their own countries, they were church-goers people. So it is their PTDs by having the services, and they're grateful for that. And the rest of the others that have never gone to a service, they will come looking for that missing part that they have. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound like there's a lot of interest in God, or at least in faith or spiritual direction. So, right. Sir, do you want to?
Well, you mentioned the lack of services. And more resources, but I've worked 30 years in the court system as a judge, and I would say that you really got to work hard to get into prison anymore. I mean, you can get a deferred judgment. You can be put on probation. You can be placed in halfway facilities, and I mean there's so many services made available to people. And what all those services do, they keep reoffending and they end up in prison. So I'm just saying, I'm not sure that's the answer, more services. There are a plethora of services available, and they're used and they're utilized. But people still end up in prison.
So, sir, what's your proposal? I mean, what alternative do you think?
I'm not proposing anything. I'm just reacting to the need for more services.
Gotcha. I'm not saying that there's not services available, but the numbers that they reach are a small percentage in comparison to the number of people that we incarcerate, we put on parole, and the number of people that come through our judicial system. I applaud you if you did your job that way and you were able to divert people to those programs. But the bed space is very few, and it's just like with our cuts back with the government, with our budget being so lean. The same thing with the federal government, which halfway houses, are supported by federal grants, by federal monies, which have been cut. So they don't have the bed space. They don't have the lucrative services that they once had. Yes, once we did have that, but by far the number of people we have coming through our system, whether it's from in front of the judge, whether it's drug court, once they come to jail, prison, whatever, the services are much diminished. I mean, the halfway houses are out there. We do have diversionary programs that are available, but the number of people that they can supervise or do, it's just not there anymore.
And I just want to pick up on your point because I think it's both. I think we can agree with what you're saying and also say that we could do better at targeting services. And I just mentioned this because I had the experience. So I was in Southern Illinois when we closed TAMS, right? So we closed TAMS for a whole host of reasons, including we wanted to be a more humane system. We thought it was too much. We thought a lot of things. And then so we just moved that problem that existed at TAMS to places like Menard and Pontiac and other things. So that's part of the challenge too. Like I'm not sure where I'm at on this issue because like I toured TAMS. It's a beautiful, clean facility. You got no inmates. You got no bunkie. You got nobody that you got to worry about is going to kill you in your sleep. I was like, if I had to be incarcerated, maybe I'd want to go here. Months later, I see what they're doing for a guy who can't stop hurting himself. He keeps sticking stuff in his own stomach. He does things to himself. He's self-mutilator. And so in order to try to deal with him, because they didn't have the resource that was TAMS anymore, they built this horrifying 6x6 metal box to stick, like totally welded and like it. I'm not claustrophobic. I walked, we had to review it. We had to look at it. I walked in. I was like, oh, I had to get out immediately. Like, so, when we're trying to answer these problems, sometimes it's the opposite, right? So I think that's just something that we have to acknowledge. I think it's both, I guess, is what I would say about that. And I wanted the East Moline example about volunteers and chaplains, that also is a resource problem. I happen to have been engaged in a safety review at that facility in particular. They have a beautiful chapel that was built in 1950 whatever, right? And it's a roundhouse, and it's falling apart. They can't find an architect that can help them. They don't have the money to fix it. So instead, they have chapel services in the basement in a building that they have a whole host of other things happening, right? So it's not for anybody's lack of wanting to do more services in that particular example. It's simply the logistics of it make it impossible. So again, it gets to resources, it gets to priorities, but loud and clear, I've heard you. You've helped me, actually. Don't tell Carolyn, but we're gonna use this, and we're gonna go talk to East Moline and try to do something about that.
I can further answer her question.
Excellent. Good.
Good.
All right. Well, we're halfway to the solution I was hoping we were getting to, so that's excellent news.
And as far as you coming in once every 90 days, and I don't know like who's the head of your group that got you guys in there, but that's a limited volunteer status, and so that's all we can let you in under that status is once every 90 days. Yeah, but you guys could become regular volunteers, and if that's a problem, then if you want to come give me your name, and we'll see what we can do to get you in as a regular volunteer.
That would be nice. We have time. We have about 1 minute left before I'm going to close this out.
I have a question. Your comment or your statistic up there, the 5% of the world's population, and then we have 25% of the world's prisoners.
Yes.
Okay. Is there something that we are missing that other countries are doing?
Wow. Well, so everybody stay at least another hour. We're all going to be here. Get more pizza. Does anybody have some response?
I don't have an elevator speech, but I can give you just a few kind of quick snippets of what they do differently, like in Europe, for example. In Europe, typically sentences are just not as long as ours, right? So you offend, even if you're a bank robber, you serve 6 months. If you hurt somebody, it's maybe 4 years, 5 years, and that's it. You kill somebody, it's maybe 10 or 15. So like for us as a culture, we will have to really wrap our heads around that, right? Because that is completely outside our experience. That's one thing. Another thing is just the social safety net. The fabric of their societies is typically, I'm not going to use the word socialism, but they pay a lot higher taxes and they get a lot more for those dollars than we do. So I think those two things are probably just a quick and dirty way to get at that part of that answer. They just spend more on it, and they don't ask people to spend as much time in the system when they're required to by their laws.
Awesome.
I'd like to support that. Germans, they have not more than 5 years, even for murder, but they do a real intense rehabilitation. I mean, it's almost a boot camp, army type situation. And then if you don't improve, at the end of the 5 years, if they really are someone that's very, very bad, they put them into the mental health system. Okay? And it's a much more effective, much more cost-effective system.
The mental health system, which exists in their countries.
Yeah. So
And in the Netherlands, they have so many empty prisons that they're renting out their prisons to other countries.
It sounds like we need a follow-up discussion on this one, really, about this topic. I just want to, we're at time, so I just want to take a minute and just say thank you all for being the most wonderful, engaged, patient, listening audience. It's been such a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you so much. I want to give a really big thank you to Tanya, George, Eddie, and Carolyn for being such wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. And then again, just a hats off to the library staff for being so wonderful, and to Elliot, Paul, and Matt from Illinois Humanities. Please come and talk to these folks before you leave. Matt, you want to have any closing words?
Well, I know obviously we're completely out of time, so this is only a rhetorical question. But if folks are interested in talking about it on your way out, I'd love to hear especially what people here in Thomson have to say about the question of how the prison system.
Oh, don't do that. Yeah, dang. Yeah.
Sorry.
How the prison system and different people's experiences with it both reflect and affect rural-urban dynamics, which obviously is another. We could have a 3-hour conversation, but I'm just personally, I'm just really curious, especially those of you who live here in the Thomson area and are familiar with the Thomson prison. I'm just really curious what people think about that question. How do rural and urban dynamics play into the prison system and vice versa? But anyway, we're certainly out of time, and I thank you all so much.
And please.